Stop. Just stop for a moment. Don't scroll, because if you found this message tonight, something unusual has already happened. Out of millions of possible moments, you landed here. Maybe you think it was random. Maybe you believe the algorithm simply pushed this video in front of you. But what if that isn't the whole story? What if something inside you recognized this message before your mind even understood why? Listen carefully. You have been waiting for a sign. Maybe you never admitted it out loud, but deep inside you've been asking questions that no one around you could answer. Why do certain people suddenly disappear from your life? Why do old dreams no longer excite you? Why does it feel like you're standing between two different versions of yourself, unable to move forward, yet unable to go back? It isn't weakness. And it isn't the end of your story. It is the beginning of something your future self has been trying to prepare you for. Take a slow breath. Because what you're about to hear may sound impossible at first, but don't rush to judge it. Just listen until the end of this message, because every sentence builds on the one before it. If you leave too early, you'll only hear half of the transmission, and half the truth often feels like fiction. Now let me ask you something. Have you noticed strange little moments lately? Looking at the clock at exactly the right second, hearing the same words from different people, thinking about someone just before they call, or feeling an unexplained pull toward changing your life. Most people ignore these moments. You didn't. That's why you're still here. Here's what no one tells you. The human mind is always searching for patterns, but sometimes the patterns begin searching for you. It's as if your inner frequency starts matching experiences that were invisible before. Suddenly, doors seem to close, friendships shift, opportunities appear from places you never expected. It feels confusing because your old map no longer matches the road beneath your feet. And that's exactly where your future self begins speaking. Not through a loud voice, not through magic, but through quiet moments that almost everyone else overlooks. Imagine an old radio sitting inside a forgotten house. For years, it only played static. One night, without anyone touching it, the signal slowly becomes clear. The station was always there. The radio simply wasn't tuned correctly. Now think about yourself. What if your life has never been missing the signal? What if tonight, you're finally tuning in? That question changes everything. Because the biggest shift doesn't begin when the world changes. It begins when you stop hearing only noise. Viral line. Your future doesn't knock on the door. It changes the frequency until you finally recognize the sound. Stay with me. This message isn't asking you to believe blindly. It's asking you to observe your own life with fresh eyes. Think about the challenges you've faced recently, the disappointment, the silence, the moments you wondered if you were falling behind while everyone else seemed to move ahead. What if those moments weren't punishments? What if they were clearing space? When a room is full, nothing new can enter. Sometimes life removes what no longer belongs before it reveals what does. That can feel lonely. It can feel unfair. But here's the strange part. People often realize the meaning only after they've crossed the threshold. While they're inside the change, everything feels uncertain. Looking back later, every closed door suddenly makes sense. Maybe that's where you are tonight, standing at the edge of something you cannot fully see. And if that's true, then the next question becomes impossible to ignore. What exactly is your future self trying so desperately to tell you? Before this night is over, before we uncover that answer, do one small thing. If this message already feels like it was meant to find you, leave a comment with the words, "I am ready." Like this video, subscribe, and take one slow breath. That simple action isn't for me. It's a moment where you consciously choose to pay attention. Because in the next part, something unexpected happens. Your future self doesn't simply send a message. It reveals why tonight is different from every night that came before. The moment you said, "I am ready," whether you typed the words or simply whispered them in your mind, something shifted. Not because a comment has magical power. Not because pressing a button changes reality. But because every real transformation begins with a decision. Before the outside world moves, something inside quietly says, "I'm no longer willing to stay the same." That invisible decision is where your future self has been waiting. Now listen. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning. The room looks the same. The walls haven't changed. The people around you are still living their normal lives. Yet something feels different. You can't explain it. You simply notice that your mind isn't reacting the way it used to. The fears that controlled you yesterday suddenly feel smaller. The noise around you loses its grip. Why? Because your attention has begun moving toward a different frequency. Here's what most people never notice. Reality doesn't usually change in one dramatic explosion. It changes through tiny signals that arrive before the big moment. A conversation, a strange opportunity, an unexpected delay, a person who enters your life at exactly the right time. At first, they seem unrelated, until one day, every piece fits together like a puzzle that had already been completed long before you saw it. Your future self remembers that puzzle. You don't. At least not yet. And that's why this message exists. Now let me take you somewhere. Picture an enormous library hidden beyond a quiet mountain. There are no clocks inside, no windows, only endless shelves glowing with soft golden light. Every shelf holds books that contain possible versions of your life. Some books are never opened. Some remain unfinished. But one book shines brighter than all the others. The librarian walks toward it. Before opening it, they smile and say something unexpected. This version only becomes visible when the person is finally ready to believe they can become someone new. Then they open the first page. You expect to see tomorrow. Instead, you see tonight. That surprises you because you've always believed the future begins later. But according to this story, the future begins the moment your identity changes, not the moment the calendar changes. Think about that. How many times have you told yourself, I'll start next week, next month, next year? Your future self has been quietly answering, no, start tonight. Because tomorrow is built by the person you become before you fall asleep. Viral line. The life you've been chasing doesn't begin tomorrow. It begins the night you stop introducing yourself as your old self. Now something even stranger happens. The librarian points to several pages that are completely blank. You ask, why aren't they written? The answer is simple. They're waiting for the choice you haven't made yet. Isn't that interesting? If everything were already fixed, those pages would already be full. But they're empty because your future isn't a prison. It's a field of possibilities responding to who you are becoming. That's why some people experience sudden breakthroughs, while others stay in the same place for years. It isn't always because they worked harder. Sometimes, they simply crossed an invisible threshold where they finally believed a different future belonged to them. Maybe you felt that threshold before. A moment when your heart said yes, but your fear said no. A dream appeared. Then doubt quietly closed the door. Here's the truth. Every time that happened, your future self was learning something. Not failing, learning. Every setback became information. Every disappointment became preparation. Every delay quietly shaped the person who could actually handle the life they were asking for. Now ask yourself, what if the waiting wasn't keeping you away from your future? What if it was building the version of you capable of living inside it? That single question has changed countless lives. And yet, this is only the beginning. Because the message you've heard so far isn't the most surprising part. Your future self still hasn't revealed why tonight carries a different energy than every other night you've lived through. And when that reason is finally revealed, you'll never look at your past the same way again. Tonight feels ordinary. The sky is still the sky. The clock keeps moving. People are finishing their day without realizing anything unusual is happening. But you feel like something is quietly building beneath the surface. You can't see it. You can't prove it. Yet you can't ignore it anymore. That feeling has a purpose. Now let me explain why. Think about a seed buried deep beneath the ground. For weeks, sometimes months, nothing seems to happen. Anyone looking from above would say the seed is lifeless. But underground, everything is changing. Tiny roots are growing in complete darkness. They don't ask for applause. They don't announce themselves. They simply prepare for the moment they can finally break through the surface. Your life works in much the same way. The world celebrates what grows above the ground. Your future self celebrates what grows below it. That's why you felt frustrated. You've been measuring yourself by visible results, while your deepest transformation has been happening where nobody, including you, could see it. Now listen carefully. There comes a moment when the roots become strong enough. After that, the breakthrough isn't difficult anymore. It's inevitable. Maybe that's why this message found you tonight. Not because tonight is magically different, but because you have reached a point where your unseen growth is ready to become visible. Here's what no one tells you. Before every major life change, there is often a strange season where everything feels uncertain. Old habits stop satisfying you. Conversations feel empty. Places that once felt like home suddenly feel unfamiliar. Even your own thoughts begin to sound different. Many people mistake this feeling for being lost. But what if it's actually proof that you've already started leaving your old identity behind? Imagine walking across an ancient stone bridge covered in morning mist. Halfway across, you stop. Behind you, the land you've always known begins to disappear into the fog. Ahead of you, the new land isn't visible yet. For one quiet moment, that moment feels uncomfortable. It feels lonely. It feels uncertain. But it's also the only place where transformation can happen. Because if you could still clearly see your old life, you'd go back. And if you could already see your new life, there would be no need for faith. The bridge exists so your old identity slowly lets go before your new one fully arrives. Viral line. The most powerful transformation happens where the old you has disappeared, but the new you has not yet introduced itself. Take another slow breath. Now ask yourself something you've probably never asked before. What if your greatest fear isn't failure? What if your greatest fear is becoming the person you've always imagined? Because once that happens, there's no returning to the version of yourself you've already outgrown. That question makes many people uncomfortable. Because deep inside, staying familiar often feels safer than becoming extraordinary. Your future self understands this. That's why the message hasn't rushed you. Every word has been preparing you. Not for information, for recognition. Recognition that you've been changing longer than you've realized. Recognition that your difficult seasons weren't empty. Recognition that every disappointment quietly removed another layer of the person you were never meant to remain. Now, let me tell you a story. Long ago, there was a traveler named Elian who searched the world for a legendary gate of light. He crossed frozen mountains, endless deserts, silent forests, asking everyone the same question. Where is the gate? Some laughed. Some pointed in different directions. Years passed. Tired and disappointed, Elian finally returned to the small village where he had started. An old woman sitting beside a quiet river looked at him and smiled. You've traveled very far. I had to, Elian replied. I was searching for the gate. The woman nodded. You found it. Elian looked around in confusion. Where? She gently touched the center of his chest. The gate was never a place waiting for you. It was a person waiting to awaken. Elian closed his eyes. For the first time, he understood why every road had been necessary. Not because the journey revealed the gate, because the journey revealed him. Now think about your own journey. Could every challenge, every delay, every goodbye have been shaping the person who could finally hear this message tonight? Don't answer too quickly, because the next part reveals something even deeper. Your future self is about to explain why certain people are quietly disappearing from your life, and why that isn't a loss at all. It may be the clearest sign, yet that your new life has already begun. Have you noticed it? People you thought would always be beside you have slowly faded away. Conversations that once lasted for hours now end in minutes. Some people stopped calling. Others became strangers without a single argument. And perhaps the hardest part, no one ever explained why. For a long time, you blamed yourself. Maybe I said something wrong. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe I should have tried harder. But what if your future self has been watching those moments with completely different eyes? Now listen. Imagine you're climbing a mountain before sunrise. At the bottom, hundreds of people are walking beside you. Everyone talks. Everyone laughs. The path feels crowded. But as you climb higher, something changes. The air becomes thinner. The trail becomes narrower. Without anyone making a decision, fewer and fewer people continue the journey. Not because they're bad people. Not because you're better than them. Simply because everyone is walking toward a different destination. That's how life often works. Some people are meant for one chapter, not the entire book. Your future self understood this long before you did. That's why every goodbye carried a hidden purpose. Think back to someone you couldn't imagine living without. At the time, losing them felt like the end of everything. Yet here you are, still breathing, still growing, still searching. If they had stayed, would you have become the person you are today? Maybe. Maybe not. But here's what changes everything. Sometimes the people who leave aren't taking something away from you. They're creating space for someone or something you haven't met yet. Nature has always worked this way. When autumn arrives, the tree doesn't chase its falling leaves. It lets them go. Not because the tree hates them, but because it knows new growth cannot appear while it keeps holding on to what has already finished its purpose. Now ask yourself, what have you been trying to hold on to long after life was asking you to release it? An old dream? A painful memory? A version of yourself that no longer feels true? Here's what no one tells you. The hardest chains to break aren't around your wrists. They're around your identity. The moment you stop saying, "This is just who I am," you open the door to becoming someone you've never allowed yourself to be. Viral line. Your next life doesn't begin when new people arrive. It begins when you stop chasing the ones who were only meant to pass through. Now let me tell you another story. There was once a woman named Mira who lived beside a quiet lake. Every evening, she filled a small lantern and placed it on the water, believing one day it would guide someone back into her life. Night after night, month after month, year after year, she waited. One evening, an old traveler stopped beside the lake and asked, "Who are you waiting for?" "My future," she answered softly. The traveler smiled. "No." He pointed toward the dozens of lanterns floating farther and farther away. "You're waiting for your past." Mira stood in silence. For the first time, she realized every lantern she released wasn't guiding someone back. It was keeping her eyes fixed behind her. Slowly, she stopped sending lanterns onto the lake. Instead, she watched the sunrise. And in that sunrise, she noticed something she had missed for years. A path leading forward had always been there. She simply couldn't see it while staring at the water. Maybe you've been doing the same thing. Maybe you've been asking life to return what was only meant to prepare you. Your future self isn't asking you to forget your past. It's asking you to stop living inside it. Because something extraordinary happens when your attention finally turns forward. The opportunities you've been praying for begin to notice you. The courage you've been searching for begins to grow quietly. And the life that once felt impossible starts feeling familiar. Not because the world suddenly changed. Because you did. Now take one slow breath. Close your eyes for just a moment if you can. Picture yourself 1 year from tonight. You're smiling, not because every problem disappeared, but because you finally stopped measuring your future through the lens of your past. That version of you is closer than you think. Closer than yesterday. Closer than this morning. In fact, that version may already be reaching back toward you. And in the final part of this journey, your future self reveals the one practice that can help you recognize that new version every single day, starting tonight. Because the message wasn't only meant to be heard, it was meant to be lived. Tonight is not the finish line. It's the first step. Everything you've heard so far has been leading here, not to convince you that your life will magically change overnight, but to show you that every lasting transformation begins with one quiet moment of awareness. And that moment is happening now. Your future self has one final message. Not a prediction. Not a promise. A practice. Because knowledge without action becomes another forgotten memory. But a simple action, repeated with intention, slowly becomes a new identity. So here's what your future self asks you to do before you sleep tonight. Sit somewhere quiet. Close your eyes. Take one slow breath in, and another. Now imagine yourself standing in front of a calm lake just before sunrise. The water is perfectly still. As you look into it, you don't see the face you've carried through years of doubt, fear, or disappointment. You see the version of yourself that already crossed the bridge. The version that no longer asks, "Am I enough?" They look directly at you. They smile. And they say only 4 words. "I'm waiting. Keep walking." Nothing more. Nothing less. Stay with that image for a moment. Feel what happens inside you. Notice how your shoulders begin to relax. Notice how your breathing slows. Notice how hope quietly replaces pressure. This isn't about pretending problems don't exist. It's about remembering that your problems are not your identity. Here's something most people never realize. The future self you're searching for isn't racing toward you. It's standing still, waiting for you to become the person who can recognize it. Think about every challenge you've survived. The days you thought would break you, didn't. The nights you believed you'd never recover from, passed. The doors that closed, forced you to discover paths you would have never chosen on your own. None of those moments were wasted. They became part of the person listening to these words right now. Viral line. One day you'll thank every closed door because it protected the life that wasn't meant for you. Now let me tell you the final truth. People spend years asking, when will my life change? Your future self asks a different question. When will you believe it already has? Read that again in your mind. Because the greatest shift doesn't happen when reality finally agrees with you. It happens when your heart quietly stops arguing with the possibility of a better future. From that moment, you begin speaking differently, choosing differently, walking differently, and little by little, reality begins responding to the person you've become. Not instantly, but consistently. That's how every meaningful transformation grows. Quietly, patiently, powerfully. So before you leave this video, I want you to make one small promise. Not to me, but to yourself. When you wake up tomorrow morning, don't ask, will today be different? Instead ask, how would my future self live this day? Then take one action that matches the answer. Just one. Because one action becomes one habit. One habit becomes one identity. And one identity creates an entirely different life. If this message found you at exactly the right time, write these words in the comments. My new life begins tonight. Read a few other comments as well. You may discover someone else standing on the same bridge you are crossing today. Like this video if it spoke to something words couldn't fully explain. Subscribe if you're ready to keep exploring these hidden messages together. And whenever life feels uncertain again, come back to this moment. Remember the bridge. Remember the mountain. Remember the library. Remember the gate. Most of all, remember that your future self never stopped believing in you, even during the days you stopped believing in yourself. Because this message was never about predicting your future. It was about reminding you that every sunrise begins long before the first light appears. Tonight, the first light has already arrived.